It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brandt Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them. So thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. Today, my guest is Nick Turner, CEO of Dreamdata. Nick is a seasoned B2B software leader with nearly 2 decades of experience building and scaling go-to-market teams, helping companies grow from early traction to tens of millions in revenues. And before stepping into the CEO role, Nick served as Chief Revenue Officer at Dreamdata, where he played a key role in shaping the company's growth strategy and expanding its presence in the U.S. market. He later transitioned to the CEO seat, leading the company through a pivotal phase of scale and transformation. Nick Turner, welcome into the corner office.
Hey, Brandt, thanks for having me.
And where do we find you today?
I am sitting in our office in New York, just near Penn Station, 8th Avenue and 36th.
Beautiful. And spring's on its way already. What's the city doing like today?
Oh, it's beautiful today. It's 85 degrees. Nice spring day. Feels a bit like summer, so everyone's excited.
On its way soon, I'm sure. Well, I know that's not where you're from originally, but we always like to start the podcast understanding a little bit of the early story. So tell us where you grew up and what your early family life was like.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I grew up in Virginia. I'm 45 years old, to give some context of what Virginia was like when I lived there. So I grew up in a little town called Yorktown. Although I lived in several places in Virginia, my family's from a town called Martinsville, and I spent a lot of time there. And Martinsville is inland, so it's Appalachia. It's known for 2 things. It used to be the furniture capital of America, if not the world.
Right.
And then, of course, there's a NASCAR speedway there called Martinsville 500. So that is what it's famous for. And I spent a lot of time there growing up. That's where most of my family lives in and around that area in Virginia. And Yorktown, we moved out to the coast near Norfolk, Virginia Beach. I guess when I was 6, something like that.
Awesome.
But that's where I spent most of my life.
Those formative years. What did mom and dad do?
Yeah, so my mom and both my mom and my dad, they got married quite young. They got married at 17 and 19. Originally, they actually both didn't graduate high school. They both end up with a GED eventually. My father was he dropped out of high school to join the Army. So he was it was kind of one of those situations where, hey, if you're drafted, then you kind of don't get to pick what you do. And if you join, then maybe you get the choice. And so, that was for the Vietnam War. So he dropped out and joined the Army, and then went back, got a GED, eventually got his degree. So he was a mechanical engineer, and my mother was effectively a homemaker. And so stay-at-home mom, raised my brother and I from birth until we were ready to go out on our own.
Just the 2 of you in the home, and what were your age differences?
Brother and I are about 7 years difference, so it was just us 2.
And you're the older of the 2 or the younger?
I am the younger, actually.
Thinking back to those early days and kind of the impressions that you had, particularly from mom and dad, what were the things that you kind of took away? What was it that you learned, growing up as a kid?
I learned a ton from obviously my entire family, but my grandmother just really sticks out to me. Both of my grandmothers. They were both what you might call depression babies. So born in, 1926, 1927, I think both of them. Big families, just kind of lived that Depression era life, and both got married. A lot of people in that area of Virginia, of course, and in that time frame, got married very young.
Right.
But my grandmother on my mother's side, she got married when she was 17. She 3 months later, her husband went off to Normandy in 1944, and of course, he unfortunately passed there. So
Hmm.
she got remarried. So she was a young widow. She was a 17-year-old widow,
Wow.
effectively. And she met someone else, had 5 kids, and honestly ended up raising them on her own. And it was a tough life. It's hard to be a single mom. I would say it's even harder to be a single mom in the 50s, 60s, 70s in a poor area of
Right.
the country. And
Rural
so,
Virginia. Yeah.
rural Virginia, and what she, the work that she did I tend to think of, my life it is my own, but it's not fully my own. I'm here because of what people have done before me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, so I think of two or three things. I think, how am I going to make sure what the work that she did matters? And then how am I going to make sure, like, whoever stands on my shoulders, they have a good start to life and
Right.
a good chance for happiness and success.
Yeah, yeah, gosh. And you were involved, and the grandmas were involved in your life, like had family dinners and, kind of a lot of together time there, babysitting you and so forth. I mean, how involved were they in your life growing up?
Pretty involved. I was there. They would visit. They would visit us. I would be there often. I would spend time in the summers with them.
Nice.
So they were a significant part. I mean, I think that they're kind of like the matriarchs, of course, of the family. And actually, on my father's side, my grandmother also raised 2 kids on her own. Her husband died very young. He died before he was 30. And so she raised 2 kids on her own as well.
A lot of resilience in your family.
Yes, I mean, I think so. Those 2 women are just incredible.
Yeah,
None of us are here. Nothing happens in my life without them, obviously. But I think that, without their example, who knows what I'd become.
yeah,
So
love it. Were you a good student in school? Did you enjoy it?
I wasn't really a good student. No, I'll be. I mean, I think, if you look at, I guess I was a better student in high school. I was a worse student in college. I was very much. I just wanted to get out and do something, and I went to Virginia Tech. When you go through high school and you're a senior in high school and you have to pick, well, where are you going to go to school? I did
Right.
early decision to Virginia Tech. I didn't apply to anywhere else. I got accepted. Today, I would not get in. The school has changed quite a lot. That was
Yeah,
1998, and so I probably would never get in with my grades from high school. Not that I was a horrible student, but I also, I was very set on getting something done, working, as opposed to learning. I think my learning style is very trial and error. I want to go out and get to work and try something, and if it doesn't work, then adapt and do that on and on. Not that I didn't really enjoy learning and that I don't still enjoy learning. It's just, my style was very much, hey, go out and try something. If it doesn't work, adapt and adjust and then change accordingly. So,
were you
but I will
involved in
say, I got my I got my degree. I got my I made it through, and I had I was a B student. I wasn't going to be valedictorian or anything like that.
Were
So,
you involved in entrepreneurial activities as a kid? Were those some of the things that you did growing up?
uh, I worked. I always
Yeah,
had a job.
yeah,
I had a job from the day that I could work. Even before then, whether it was mowing lawns or working, I had worked some as jobs as a dishwasher, as a cook, bar back. I was working through high school. I was working in college, and so I always had 1 or 2 part-time jobs that I was working. So I don't know if that's entrepreneurial, but what I really enjoyed in high school, was computers, obviously. But I ended up going to school for computer science. But in high school, I was, that was 1995. The internet
right.
was just coming
Yeah,
to be, and so I was learning how to write websites, and I built a website, and just constantly learning, like, what can I do next? Like, how can I make this better? So I did a lot of, I worked, but I also was was kind of just learning the internet age as it was, as it was growing.
Now, was it a foregone conclusion that you'd go to college? Like, for example, did your older brother go? I know you mentioned about your parents, getting their degrees later in life.
Yeah, I was. I guess I was the first to take like a traditional route that you might see from like a typical upper middle class family or middle class, where I graduated high school, then I go right to college. I was the first one to do that in the family. Others, of course, got degrees, and I wasn't the last one to do it, but I was the first one that was able to actually do that and work my way and pay my way through college,
Nice.
um, doing that. So I don't know if it was I think it was expected, but foregone conclusion, not in my family. No.
Yeah, yeah, got it. But you chose kind of the entrepreneurial route coming out, right? Wasn't your first company a
Yeah.
startup?
Yeah. Well, my first company coming out of college, yeah, when I was a runner. I wouldn't say I'm not saying I was a very good runner, but I liked to run, and I ran cross country. And coming out of college, I also got into triathlons, and so I didn't take the traditional route right after school. I ended up working part time for this construction company, and this is 2003. Part time because I could have time to train for three different sports. Obviously biking, running, swimming, and so I got into marathons. I got into Ironmans, and would spend a lot of my time doing that. And ended up in this part-time job at a construction company. And the owner found out about my background, that I had gone to school and gotten kind of both a business degree and a kind of computer science degree. And he asked me if I wanted to go in kind of half and take on the business side of the
Mm,
company.
okay.
And I said yes. I said, why not? It's kind of not the direction that I was necessarily going to take out of college, but it seemed interesting. And I ended up writing software for the company that we used to manage the business. And then owned that for 5 years. We scaled it up. We were building custom homes, doing remodeling in Virginia. And from there, I ended up obviously owning a construction company in 2006, 2007, and 2008. You learn a lot about how macroeconomic events can shape and change your
Impact you.
life,
Right, right.
and what you what you have to persevere through.
Yeah,
So I when went through that, obviously, in construction in 2003, 2004, everything is going just great.
right.
For somehow everyone seems to be able to get a mortgage, everyone can buy a house, nobody's really questioning it, and you just keep building and people keep buying, and then of course the music stops in 2007, 2008, and everyone realizes, oh, this is how it was working, and that's not a very healthy economy. And
Right.
so I ended up, um, we ended up having to shut the business down. And so the what happened basically was, there wasn't demand anymore, and what you could charge to build a house just wasn't there.
Right.
And so we got to a point where we were looking at potential bankruptcy, and I ended up in late 2008, something like that, going to, when you build a house, you have 30 to 40 different suppliers, subcontractors that you're utilizing to get that house built. And so I went out to them and said, look, we can't pay you what we owe you. I'm sorry. Um, but if you all take a deal, you can all be guaranteed 75% or whatever the percentage was. It was close to that. And, we don't end up in a lawsuit for 3 years where the lawyers make all the money and everyone else ends up with nothing. And so
Mm.
I had to line up those 30 to 40 subcontractors and suppliers over the course of about 4 to 5 days. You have to do it quick because you don't want anybody to get antsy about a situation like that. Because obviously nerve wracking for them. They're in the same boat as I am, and they're looking to me to figure out how am I going to help them pay their bills. So
Yeah.
did that very quickly, and I think it was important to do it. I went in person, met everyone, lined that up, and people were thankful for it, even though they knew they couldn't get everything they wanted. And that's how I wound down the business. A couple months later, I said, well, that was an adventure. It wasn't what I was going to be doing with my life. But it was a huge, kind of life changing experience, I think, to go through that because I was 20, I guess I was 27.
If you look back at that, Nick, and think about maybe 2 or 3 of the key lessons you learned through having to shut that business down, what would you say are the most important and relevant that you applied today to your current job?
First off, integrity is really important.
Yeah.
I think,
That's
you
what was
know,
going
it,
through my mind as you explained that, going back to the people. It's just so important to be integrity.
yeah, I think that's really important, especially today. Today is obviously in software. It's what I would call, it's an exciting time. It's three things. It's incredibly exciting. People have built frontier models that can do incredible things at Anthropic, at OpenAI, and others. But we're also in like a high hype period.
Yeah.
And so there's a ton of hype. We might be peak hype. You keep thinking you're at peak hype, and then it keeps getting even hypier. And
Right.
those things can all be true. Really incredible things happening in the industry, but there might be some hype around it. And so what I think is really important today is you need to have integrity around what you're telling your customers, you're telling the market that you're capable of doing,
Mm,
and not overpromising. And I think when you are exiting a time period of a lot of hype, that will come back to serve you well. And
yeah.
so I think that's really important. Um, that they obviously there's the other part of it, of course, is the financial side. Making sure you have a strong handle on your finances and how you manage money. Um, just, I mean, it should go without saying, but for a long time, I think that helped me in the time frame of like the ZERP, where money was just free for 10, 12 years, maybe a bit longer, where you know it wasn't hard to raise money, and it was all about growth at all costs because money was free. So
Right.
that having gone through that in 2008 gave me a bit more perspective, maybe a bit more conservative with how I thought about, how do you use your resources?
Mm,
Even if resources are free, someday they're not going to be free, and they are going to be scarce, and you need to kind of be able to plan for that day. And that probably just goes back to my grandmother's a little bit in terms of kind of that depression era, being raised in that era. I'm sure that had kind of rubbed off on me a little bit.
yeah. How many employees did you have to let go with that
We
opportunity
had
for?
30
Wow,
people,
it's tough.
something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you think about some of the leadership lessons too, are those same principles applied? I mean, how do you kind of view that experience now with the team that you're building at Dreamdata?
Well, I think the same thing about, I talked about overpromising to the market. You also can't overpromise to your team, and
Yep.
the team is not just your employees, it's your board, it's your investors, it's your executive team. Um, that's really important. So, I'm not someone that's ever going to go out and say, "Hey, we're gonna grow at 10x next year." I want to set a good expectation of what's realistic. You know, I don't want to say, but I mean, it is kind of, under promise, over deliver. Not that in sales, you call it sandbagging.
Right. Right.
You don't want to do that, but you do just, you want to be aggressive with your goals, but you don't want to set something that's outrageous. That's a good recipe for causing a lot of pain for yourself and for the people that are relying on you to make good decisions.
Yeah. You kind of came up through the sales side, right?
hmm
Strategic accounts, and obviously VP of global sales and a couple of jobs. When you think about kind of that career trajectory, what were the areas where you had to kind of go outside and get other discipline experience to best prepare you for your CEO?
I've always been at startups, so I've always joined companies that were smaller, single digit millions, and worked to scale them up.
Right.
I never looked at sales. I never looked at myself as a salesperson.
Mm,
I always looked at myself as someone trying to help somebody else solve a problem. And that is kind of what sales should be. If you have a solution, then you should be working to solve that problem. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, and you need to be respectful and say it's not going to work. Here's another option for you. And it may not benefit you, but it benefits them. And that again, that comes back to help you over the course of many years that if you stick to the same industry.
Right.
But I think, my experience having run a business, having a computer science degree gave me a lot of, I could speak to things about a customer's company that maybe a salesperson that had just gone to school and went out and got a job at Salesforce as a salesperson, it may not have had that experience to speak to those kind of very things that your prospect might be thinking about. So, so all of that I think informed, yeah, obviously who I am today, but also having the chance to be a CEO now. Um, all of that came together to make this possible, I guess.
Now joined Dreamdata first as their chief revenue officer. Were you involved in the startup stage at that stage? Is that when the company was founded?
Company was founded 5 or 6 years before I joined, so no, I
Okay.
wasn't involved at that point. And I would say, a key thing about me, well, another key thing is like knowing yourself. You have to know what you're good at, what you're not good at. And I'm not a 0 to 1 kind of person. I'm very much more of an operator and someone that can scale, and I can play off of somebody else's ideas, and I'd like to think maybe hopefully make them a little better. But starting from nothing, I've had an experience where I tried to do that and it didn't work for me. I just didn't like it. But starting from somewhere that has product market fit or is approaching product market fit, um, I can take that and I can help to build systems around it, and kind of make sure that we're getting the most bang for our buck from what's been built previously.
And has Dreamdata gone through some pivots? Tell us a little bit about kind of your footprint, what you're doing today, and maybe how that's changed over the last couple of years. Because AI has, of course, had an impact on everyone's business, but I think in particular Dreamdata, from what I understand from our previous
For
conversation.
sure. I mean, I think it's any company that was maybe from like what you might think of as like the SaaS era. Um, they have dealt with this, of course. And you list what's changed over the last few years. I can tell you what's changed over the last couple of months. It's kind of ever present. That it's happening much faster than it used to. The market
Right.
is kind of running a bit wild. Um, so I think what we do first off. Dreamdata is a B2B marketing attribution platform. So we help B2B companies understand what's working, what's not working in their go to market, and how they can optimize appropriately. So that's what we do, and I think the most importantly about this is it's almost never it's about what you do, but it's really about who do you want to serve,
Mm.
and making sure you stick to both a, a focused ICP and a focused user persona. And so we have always served B2B marketers. I think we will always serve B2B marketers. Um, Now, on the ICP side, the ideal kind of customer, maybe company profile is a little bit different because you're thinking about, okay, what's the size of the company? What's the industry? What's the geography? And those things can be a little bit more malleable in my mind. I think you always want to stick to a core user persona, but how you can grow your addressable market is through changing what's the industry, what's the size of company, what's the geography of the company that you want to help.
And what are you doing specifically for them? And are you serving mid-market, enterprise, startups?
Yeah, it's changed a bit. I mean, that will certainly change kind of all the time, but it is everyone has a different definition of these words. But generally speaking, mid market and enterprise is our market, and that's who we serve. We stick to Europe. We stick to the U.S. That's who we that's our core segment right now.
Got it. And the problems that you're solving are related to how to really help them with their go-to-market strategy for the most part?
That's it. Especially on where you spend your marketing efforts and dollars.
Mhm.
Is this campaign working? Is that campaign working? What's the customer journey look like? How do I optimize the dollar? There's really only two things you can do when you're building software for go to market. In my view, you're either saying, like, I can get you additional leads at a low, or I can get you the same amount of leads at a lower cost. So it's either more leads, same cost, or same leads at a lower cost. There's not too much variation. If you break down every system that's in go-to-market, they're selling one of those two things or both of those things to you in terms of how you can have an impact on them. So a lot of it is about optimization of current dollars and growth with additional dollars.
And what would you say is kind of the differentiating factor for Dreamdata against some of your key competitors?
I would say, right now, again, we're in a world of AI, and what a lot of people rush to do was go out and to build an agent. Now, agents are now very straightforward to build, but what you're feeding an agent is now everyone understands that actually, that's pretty important. And so we have an incredibly strong data model and interesting data that people can use to help build agents that are effective, and that you can, if you scale up an agent that has bad data, you're doing more crap faster. You know what I mean?
Right. It's
And
garbage
so
in,
that's
garbage out until it
exactly,
succeeds.
yeah. You're just producing more garbage,
Right.
and that's not where you want to be, I think. So I think just to give you maybe a comparison point, a lot of I'm not going to try to avoid names, but CRMs are a good example where a lot of them are highly customizable. And that means that every customer that a CRM has will have a unique data model. And each of their fields or properties or objects will mean something different to that company. And so, what that means for the CRM is that when let's say they build an agent and they deliver that agent to their customer base, they don't have any predictability around how that agent is going to perform, because every single customer that agent is trying to work with um, has a different data model or data set that it's working with.
Mm.
So our data model, we know that we can produce an agent that works consistently across every single one of our customers. Um, and we also know that we have a very interesting data set for marketers that combines everything that they would they would want to see. You can never claim to see everything. I should say, I'm going to caveat that. But you can get pretty close, and we're closer to seeing everything than we've ever been in marketing. So, I don't know, old quote, maybe it's from the 40s to 50s. John Wanamaker, he said, good news is I know half of my marketing dollars are successful. I just don't know
Still
which
don't know which
half.
half. I
And
love
so
that.
we're much closer to being able to answer that question.
Yeah.
And we answer it in a pretty answer. I should say answer that question fully. We answer it pretty well, I would say already. And I say we. I'm not saying. I don't mean to say Dreamdata. I mean to say BD marketers. We know more about our marketing today than we've ever known, and that's going to continue to get better as measurement improves.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about kind of leadership and culture. How many employees today at Dreamdata?
We've got 89.
Yeah, got it. And if you looked across kind of the landscape, is it mostly a younger group? Do you have a kind of a good mix with regards to ages, or are you finding that in the market that you're in, the more computer literate and younger employees tend to be the more productive?
I couldn't tell you the average age of the team here, to be honest. I've never looked at it like that. Um, so it's hard for me to say. I would say rather, um, well, look, when I interview, I interview just about everyone that comes through. You got myself here in New York, and then we've got Lars, who's our former CEO. He's now our chief product officer over in Copenhagen. We have a rule that at least one of us interviews everyone that joins the company. So, I tell people, look, you can interview people basically for two things: skills and personality traits. And skills to me is are you going to be how quickly will you onboard in this job, and what leg up will you give us given the skills that you have today that we don't have to teach you, because you can teach skills. And then personality traits to me are very much a kind of a cultural thing. So that's going to tell you, do we have a culture fit? And the other thing I would say is that personality traits you can't teach, especially now. I had an executive coach once who said, by the time you're 5 years old, you're pretty much the person you're going to be. And
It's
it's
true.
very hard to change someone from a personality perspective. Things can change, traumatic events can happen, things like that. And that they can change your drive and and all of that. So that can probably be built up, but you really can't make someone change their personality. They have to want to. So I tend to think of the team in that regard, as opposed to, are they younger or older? It's more about what's their adaptability.
Mm.
And there's obviously the saying that, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. I don't think that's true. I think it has much more to do with how versatile are you? Are you adaptable? That's what helps us to survive. So
What else do you look for when you're, hiring and looking to invest and hire people into Dreamdata?
yeah, I think there's really four personality and then adaptability. I'll say a few others, like curious is super important.
Mm,
Um, Curious probably goes along with adaptability a little bit, meaning that you know from a sales perspective, you're going to learn more about your customer than your competitor will. You're then more likely to be able to sell them on your solution better than another solution. So curiosity is important. That's obviously important for R&D. You got to be curious around, hey, what's the latest and greatest frontier models? What are they doing? What are the skill set? What are the skills that they are enabling agents with? And can I use those? Can I build my own? Things like that. So I think curiosity is super important. A lack of ego. Arrogance is a red flag. I think arrogance it kills companies. It kills a lot of things. But so we avoid arrogance like the plague in our candidates, and what that goes kind of hand in hand with coachability. Just being able to listen to feedback, really important. Um, the other thing I would say is competitive. You have to want to win. And it doesn't mean competitive against uh, an external competitor. Competitive with yourself
right.
is often what is really good, because if you're competitive with yourself, you'll always be thinking about, how can I get better than I was yesterday. So we kind of try to say, or I try to tell people anyway. The trick to this is you have to be kind of optimistic pessimist, or you have to be able to say, hey, I did great today, could I do better tomorrow? And so you don't want to necessarily get down on yourself, but you also need to give yourself some motivation in terms of, how can I achieve more than I achieved today. And if you keep that attitude, then you're just gradually going to perform better.
Do you have a favorite interview question that, allows you to kind of go deep and get beyond kind of the standard interview jargon?
I don't ask people what's the toughest thing you've ever done. I ask them, what's the toughest thing you've ever been through.
Mm,
And it's a little bit different, but I guess first off, it kind of is a little bit of a personal question. So it tells me one thing, if someone's willing to share it with me. If they just met me, are they willing to share kind of this personal information with
be
me?
vulnerable.
And I share mine. One of my onboarding, I always do an onboarding with everyone that joins the company, and I share kind of personal, uh, you know, information about my past and things that I went through to get here, things like that. So I think at any rate, that's one aspect of it. But really, I think to hear from someone what they've been through. First, I love the stories. I really really love the stories, and like what people have done and been through in their lives, and to get to the point that they are today is just always inspiring. So I take something from that personally, but it also just tells me, if they've been through tough situations previously, then they're going to be in a good position to stick with it at a startup, and have some tenacity to help us succeed. And if they help us succeed, they're going to succeed in turn. It's super important to me that somebody's willing to take a risk to join a company that's less than 100 people, and the risks that can come with that. I want to make sure they come out on the other side having accomplished something that they wanted, whether that was money related or just goal they had. Just making sure that they get something out of this experience is really important to me.
Yeah, got it. Well, Nick, we're just about out of time, but we always have one last question we ask all our CEO guests, and that's, what kind of life and career advice would you give to someone that has their eyes on their own corner office someday?
Arrogance, I will always come back to that. Like, you can't be willing, you have to be willing to listen to feedback from everyone, even if it's from the strangest place. Like, just listen to people when they talk,
Hmm.
and they're trying to tell you something. Try not to close your mind. Doesn't mean you have to heed all the advice. It just gives you some sort of feedback on how you're performing or things you might consider doing. So I think, yeah, I really don't like arrogance, and I also don't like assumptions. Like, please don't make assumptions. That's kind of like the mildest form of arrogance a little bit. I look at like assumptions as being a real. That's where misunderstandings and miscommunications happen between people. So I think I don't like arrogance or assumptions. And then I also just think don't take yourself seriously, but take the work seriously. That even though that's not one of our values, that's one that I wish that we had put in when we made our values. Maybe we'll change it. I don't know. But don't take yourself seriously. But take the work seriously.
Yeah, I love that. My guest today is Nick Turner. He's the CEO of Dreamdata based in New York City. Nick, thank you so much for sharing your journey into the corner office.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brandt Handley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brandt, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.goforroi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.